What's up, friends? Mike Myers here with the Songwriting for Guitar podcast, episode number 4, Dr. Frank. Now, for me, I had to control myself to not fanboy out because growing up, the Mr. T Experience was my favorite punk band. That was the band that set the bar for me when it came to songwriting, what I viewed being in a band like. So getting the chance to sit down and talk with Frank Portman, aka Dr. Frank, has seriously been so amazing. So I'm just going to jump into it. You're going to hear me kind of geek out just a tiny bit. Here we go. Episode number 4, Dr. Frank. So this is exciting for me because I can remember being, I think it was maybe sophomore year of high school. My friend Adam and I were constantly sharing CDs back and forth. And he sent me this one CD, and he would always include like these notes of like, oh, you got to check out these songs. He sent me this one CD, and he was like, I have no notes. You just have to listen to it. And the album was Revenge is Sweet and So Are You. Mm-hmm. And I remember just being there was something just awesome about that album. And then just me going back and just suddenly listening to all your discography and then just getting album after album. This was back in the day of like, I was filling out little like mail in to look out to get like CDs because there was no there wasn't Amazon. There was, I think, if we were going to, do anything with downloading songs, it took like an hour to get one song. So right. CDs were still the thing. But how did this process of being in a band, what was the turning point for you when you were like, I need to express myself through song?
Well, it was a long, slow learning curve. It was the beginning of being a rock band, a rock band playing punk rock derived music, I guess you'd say. It went from just fooling around for the first few years and not putting that much thought into it to at some point after a few years, I to my surprise, realized that this was a thing that was going to be ongoing concern. And although I never thought that I'd be talking about it 30 years later, for sure, but at some point I made a conscious decision to try to do it a little better. And there was no reason, nothing changed externally to make that happen. The bar was very low for writing and composition in the little world I was in. Basically, you could do anything and get away with it. And it was a lot of laziness on my part, as with most people. It's a rock music. It's very easy to get away with a lot of things. So, and I didn't do it we're talking around the time of, we started in 1985, first record in 86, and then a couple of records on Rough Trade, 88, 89, record on Lookout when Rough Trade US collapsed. And after that, before the second LP on Lookout, which is called Milk Milk Lemonade, I started to think, what would it be like if I put a little more effort into the songwriting? And then there started another very slow and painful learning curve that was sort of embarrassingly done in public with things that you can go back to now and look at. And so then the next few years, I was trying to take myself to song school, and gradually, replacing the bad things with better things, or at least more deliberate elements. It got better and better. And as far as just the sheer composition of melody plus lyrics and all that and all that the structural and conceptual stuff that entails, the record you mentioned is probably the high water mark of that particular version of songwriting, at least as far as music and lyrics. Yeah. Although the execution, the form of that pop punk sound did in the aggregate kind of limit what could be noticed about it. And I think a lot of you paid special attention to it. People pay special attention to it now. But at the time, it was very easy to miss the interesting stuff that was going on. And I think most people did miss it. it was a weird thing to do. That kind of writing is very, it's very much sort of aimed at a kind of Tin Pan Alley 1930s, not the aesthetic or the sound, but the sort of, compositional ethos, and doing that in the
Yeah.
context of a, more or less generic sounding, Ramones derived, pop punk, band was a weird thing to do. It's one of the things that makes it cool, but it also is, one of the things it was never what, was particularly expected or prized by audiences at the time. Although it was, in our terms, it was quite a successful record.
So starting out, in those early years with MTX, do you feel like that was the songwriting process was like, cool, we got a song. It's a song. Like it was just like a immediate acceptance of just like, cool, what do you got? That's a song.
There was no editorial. Sometimes whole songs were rejected for various reasons. But I just there wasn't even a way to tell, outside of my head on my songs anyway. John Vaughn had a handful of songs on those early records when he was in the band. But as far as my songs go, outside of my head, no one could tell whether they were good or not. I mean, no one, you couldn't hear. We playing in our little practice space with the mic plugged into an amp, and just, hey, I got this new song, and I would play it, and they would play along, and it would be half formed and half written. And by the time it came to record it, it would be in, somewhere along the stage of being kind of finished, but not, just very slapdash. Some of them accidentally wound up being okay. And if I look back on it now, I see that, the ones that did work a little better than the others in the various ways that you would judge whether things worked or not. I did learn from them. And so if you take, one of the things that I would try to do later on, and that I try to do now, is just almost like as a little experiment every time, to take a conceit and try to embody it as much as possible in every aspect of the lyrics, the music, the composition, the recording, everything about it, and then just basically take the conceit with its associated metaphors and run it into the ground, and beat it into the ground, and then salt the earth, and then just like go completely beyond what is rational. And so even going back quite a long way, that was something that, if there's a song from the 80s called Velveeta, which is a song about a girl that takes the Velveeta cheese and sort of, I would say, kind of ham-handedly tries to work out all the implications of that comparison. It's not very well executed or well done, although it does have something, and people love it. And part of the reason why people love it is it's easy to grasp. And then the elaborations just add the appearance of depth or whatever. But that's the thing that it turned out I was, if I do say so myself, to become quite good at. And I didn't realize it at the time. And there were a lot of other ones that kind of fell by didn't do much of anything. But when I started to do things better, it was doing that made them better. And so, yeah, I inadvertently learned from my own kind of stumbling.
But isn't that the best learning? I feel like, just like the I guess the scripts, the fuck ups, where you trip and fall, you end up learning so much from that. Would you say your guitar playing too? How would you describe your early playing when it comes to writing a song, like hashing out a song with chords? What was your template of trying to understand how to write a song?
I mean, it was completely ingenuous. I was an ingenue. I was the Sweet 16 just coming out, never been kissed. I was like, I didn't know at all what I was doing. I had a guitar. I knew that I knew what a 1, 4, 5 chords were, and I just randomly did it. And like I said, there was a lot of, you throw enough spaghetti at the wall and some strands stick and some strands stuck a little better than the others. And sort of, I, would mentally though not deliberately, mentally that would check off. And I listened to music that did a lot with the basics of the three chords, and I started to get. It was, it really was just a habit that as it got more comfortable, I was allowed by circumstances to grow into it a little bit. But I didn't, it was at first it was very unschooled and unplanned. I was the singer songwriter of this thing. I had to come up with some songs to have written for the band to play, and I did the best I could faking it until eventually it gradually by turns got more real. But as a guitar player, I should have been way better for all the years that I was playing. But when we recorded all those records, I was just not that. I didn't take it seriously enough. Basically, I just did what I could manage without putting too much effort into it, and it was enough, and it was fine. And people go back to some of those records, particularly that Milk Milk Lemonade album, where I did a lot of Guitar Hero kind of lead guitar stuff, and people go back to it and said that they are, it made a big impression on them at the time when they were kids and influenced them, and they're all impressed with it and everything. And at the time, it was just it was a theme of that record, and it was the one of the things that's cohesive that makes that record cohesive. But it wasn't like I didn't feel like a guitar artist. And now I'm paying more attention to it, and I am a lot better now. But I'm sure that that's as a guitar player, probably that Milk Milk Lemonade is probably what I'm always going to. And everyone said, "Why don't you do that anymore?" But I just did it that one time. That was the point. And I listen to it now, and I'm equal parts of sort of tentative satisfaction and also kind of embarrassment because it's so over the top. But yeah.
Do you find, especially during that period when it was like a 4-piece, how you played was you thought about it differently when you came into being a 3-piece, where it's just like it's just you, and you realize the song I'm writing is the song we're going to be playing live. So did that change a little bit some of the concepts of how you played?
Well, certainly when you play live, you are less likely to do, or it's less likely to work to do, big long traditional guitar solos, because it just sounds like everything drops out. But by that time, it was the recordings that was the real music, and then you were just trying to approximate it when you played live, and you never even hoped to approximate it to any degree. And so, no, it wasn't that. The reason why, sort of, I guess, being a quote power trio was kind of congruent with simplifying the arrangements, and it was a necessity when we play live to have simple arrangements. But the germ of that simplification was when through the various times when the band fell apart and it seemed like we had done our last thing, or we were just about this is going to be our swan song, and it had fallen apart, I started to think of my songs as solo songs, sort of doing them as folk songs along the lines of the minimalism of which country music, which I always really liked, and with the idea that you let the space that you get from the minimalism be filled by what the audience brings to it, rather than what's literally audibly presented. And then it's sort of turned out to be a pretty good match with a more rudimentary ensemble when we played live. But it still was always it was the way the order of operations was, strumming alone on my couch, and then the recorded version when we had a chance to record it, which we did the best we could, and then trying to pull it off live, which was often kind of a struggle.
Now, when you went into the studio to record a song, and let's say it's like kind of the bare bones and you record it, do you feel like ideas came to you in terms of like secondary guitar parts, or like, as you said, sometimes just the nuances that you would hear or your producer would hear? Do you feel like there were moments where that enhanced the song, from what you had already, but then suddenly in that studio moment, you were like, oh, this would be great here?
That happened less than you would imagine. Although when it happens, it's magic. I mean, that thing where you accidentally stumble on something, sonically that works. I mean, it happened all the time because there was so many things were left up to chance. However, we had very low budgets and no time to do much experimenting in the studio. And so it was all planned out as much as we could, as much as I could from the beginning. And there were a lot of things that I wanted to do that were just not feasible. Some of them because it was really grandiose and not feasible on the low budget. Sometimes just because they were crazy ideas that got vetoed by the producer almost immediately. But there have been, a lot there. I'm not saying there weren't any happy accidents, but on the arrangement level, it wasn't like, okay, we've got this thing. Why don't you try fooling around on this for a while and something good might happen? That was quite rare because there wasn't any time for it. I planned out the Milk Lemonade stuff. It's funny because it's so much of it is off kilter and awkward. I planned them so carefully, like to the point of, in my own crazy notation, like, I didn't do it on music staffs, but writing it all down. And I didn't have the ability to make demos at that time. So it was basically on, notepads and in my head. And I wish I'd spent that much time on the actual composition of the lyrics, because it would have been way better. But, by the time we did the ones, those middle period, the ones that are the most popular, Love Is Dead and Revenge Is Sweet, the way it worked out was, I had these songs that were composed on an acoustic guitar to be done that way. And then we just plugged in the punk, just fed it into the punk rock machine, and it spit out the version of it. And I did have these ideas that I would, production ideas that I want to happen, but there was almost never any time or time to do it, or honestly support from producer, band, and label for me to do it. So that's one of the reasons why. And I think this is the criticism I have of some of that stuff, and of the Revenge Is Sweet album. I don't think really lives up to its potential as the songs are. I can say, without the usual self-deprecation, the songs are kind of uniformly great, but there's a generic feel to them, and a lot of the what is good about them, or what is great about them, or the interesting things about them, kind of get lost in the monotonous sludge. And it didn't help that this was at the height of the loudness wars, so it was incredibly compressed, which sort of flattened out a lot of the detail there. There's a lot of interesting chords, for instance, in some of these things, interesting passing chords and so forth that you just can't hear unless already know they're there. And
is there a song in particular you think of when it comes to like some of those passing chords that you're like, I wish people could hear some of those changes?
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind is Who Needs Happiness? I'd Rather Have You. There's a lot of interesting kind of chord inversions and harmonic meta harmonic elements going on, and you can kind of hear them, but not really. And to some degree, that's an irresolvable conflict, because you are trying to do this loud rock song, and then you're also there's this kind of supposedly underlying almost jazzy sensibility that you can't have them both. And
Yeah.
but there, you can. I mean, this is part of the challenge of any of any recording, and and I fully realize that my criticism of the production on that record, the things that I criticize are largely the reason why people like it. And if I got my way, it would have been hated and probably forgotten. So that's another. I mean, I'm not the first person. I'm not the first auteur. The first guy with auteur songwriting recording artist pretensions to have that feeling. I know, but it did happen. It's inevitable that it happens, and particularly when you're just trying to get away with it as quickly as possible, because that's your only option. You make do with what you have, and you could do worse than having 16 very solid songs, which is what I think that record is.
In the time, if I think just in the past 10 years, how music has changed in terms of how you can compose ideas, get them arranged. Let's just go back to think of 1986 to now. Do you see if some of the technology was available that what we have now, how I may have done things differently?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would have. I mean, when I first started to have the ability to make my own demos that weren't just live, and I really didn't even have the ability to do that before I got my first one. Was I had one of those 4-track cassette things, and that changed the way I did things. I was able to get to communicate what was what it was supposed to be like a little better, and that and it changed how I then there was another thing, like I said, the recording, however it happened and however it ended up, was the main thing that we were trying to approximate. Then it became the demo was the main thing, and the studio recording was trying to approximate that just better, and it didn't always work. And then forget about trying to do it live. It was just you do whatever you can check the box on. But it would have it would have changed things. I don't know that it would have been necessarily better. There's a definite advantage, or not an advantage, but a benefit to the disadvantage of being boxed in and being limited. So you have to work within your limitations. And I think, if I think back to myself as a young man and all my grandiose ideas, if I were actually able to do them cheaply and just sort of without limit to the number of tracks and everything, it could quite easily have been a much more embarrassing abomination. And so being forced to having limits is sometimes good, and creatively working within the limits, that is, it's a great pop music. It was recorded on 3 tracks, 4 tracks, for most of pop music's recording of when it was, in what people think of as the classic time of American pop music. And part of what's going on is, you had to really plan ahead and be good, and you had to adapt yourself to what was to these parameters. And I always find that that's good for me. And usually it's not an option. But if it had been an option, we would have sort of had, every song would have been a kind of crappy version of Sgt. Pepper or whatever. That probably wouldn't have been good for the legacy.
But I think, a lot of your records are revered as fantastic, pop punk records, punk records. That you were on a label that I still think, people talk about Epitaph and, Fat Records. Those are great. Lookout Records was a fantastic record label as well, in terms of the bands that were associated. It was Green Day was on there. You have Operation Ivy. Do you look back now and think did it seem like everything was happening at once, and you were kind of, as you said, the band would take on a different form, some members, but now look back and you're like, wow, that was my life?
Well, I would say not with specifically with regard to Lookout, but with regard to the day-to-day business of being a band at the sort of mid to low level of the quote alternative show business circuit. We didn't know how good we had it back then. When you could spend money, money on recording a record, and people still would buy it, and you could still sustain these things. It's way better than than what was to come. And as far as Lookout, honestly, I did largely take it for granted, and we were always, almost as much by design as anything else. We were the odd man out on that label and in that scene. We were just always, we were not. I mean, you've got one dynamic in a scene, which is where there's a noticeable community of artists and audience and labels and everything, fanzines and everything, that where everybody is trying as hard as they can to plug in properly to what is to the project. And so that is and that's one way to participate in a culture. And another way to do it is to just be kind of cantankerous and reject all of the expectations and conventions and try to irritate people as much as please them. And that was definitely what we were doing.
I mean, it's kind of cool that when you look at I think it's your second album, Night Shift at the Thrill Factory, you guys are badass in your leather, but then it's kind of cool to see, like, you've got a song, History of the Concept of the Soul, which is just like, is it basically your thesis that you took and then just kind of like...
It was a paper I wrote that, when I was a history major. It was I took a class on Greek and Roman religion and wrote a paper on the history of the concept of the soul. And then I thought it would be funny to make a little song about it. Probably the song was a bit better than the paper. It was a bit more concise. But the sole reason for its existence was I wanted to put footnotes in a punk rock song. And I thought, wouldn't that be funny if I did that? That's an example. This is, when you have a strong enough conceit that it carries everything along with it. And that is the most memorable song on that album of that early period, maybe just because it has such a strong conceit, even if you might say it's quite silly, but that doesn't matter. There's a reason to know what it is, and that in a sea of content, which we've never had a bigger sea of content as now, just distinguishing any piece, distinguishing itself to that degree is very hard to come by.
And for me, I remember growing up not being like an angsty punk. Like, I was in suburban and I was just like, eh. And so when I hear something like your band, it was like, this is what I need. Like, it was relatable. Like, I remember seeing you guys way back in the day. I think it was Club Laga in Pittsburgh. And it was an awesome show. And you just started, hey, this song's about a girl. It was like, wow. It was just like, okay, cool. This is what I can get. Like, when I saw sometimes punk bands railing up against the government, I was like, it's okay. Like, it was...
That was my same... That was my same experience. I never when I was a few years earlier, when I was engaged in the punk rock scene, all the Reagan songs, all the Sandinista songs or whatever, they just didn't speak to me. I was way more kind of spiritually in tune with the Modern Lovers than the Clash, even though I love the Clash. The Clash, it had to have some relation to my own world and sensibilities. And, I think I thought at the time, and I still think, that a lot of those people who were doing that, communist revolutionary sort of content were largely faking it. Many of them were just like me, suburban kids. I just liked love songs. And then the fact that I love songs meant more to me than, kind of, I don't know what you call that, hippie politics content that was somehow the maximum rock and roll aesthetic, even though sometimes it wound up sort of, almost accidentally throwing up some good stuff, and it can be kind of amusing and interesting. I always, that didn't, that I was much more of a traditionalist as far as what I liked. And then that became a point of rebellion itself, because, when we were starting out and we weren't very, skilled at doing the thing we were trying to do, which was basically, what we got better at, but, sort of doing, is what punk rock was when I first encountered it as a teenager in the 70s, was, basically pop songs, done by punk rock bands. And then somehow in the 80s, the pop songs got left behind, and actually the songs largely got left behind, and it was all aggression and all what I think of as largely posturing. So we, would stroll into that scene, and it would just irritate people to no end that we, people were doing Reagan songs all the way up, way past Reagan's tenure. And it's like, why don't these guys have Reagan songs? Why don't they have the El Salvador song? And I used to also, play with that. And this is a song about a girl line originated that way, because it would just drive them sort of out of their minds with anger.
But that definitely had to have influenced tons of other bands or people that felt like, I kind of feel the same way. Like, when you see punk, it's like, but, me and my friends are just going to go back home and watch Monty Python. We're not going to we're not going to a rally. We're just going to watch, something that's quirky. That definitely had to set up for other bands to feel like, hey, you can do this.
Well,
there's an outlet.
Yeah, I think so. That was part of the what made that Gilman-centered scene quite a bit more interesting was that there was more room to be less generic, and there was more. You were being a weirdo was rewarded rather than penalized to some degree, and I think that it did. There's a limit to how much you get out of going around sort of LARPing as a tough guy juvenile delinquent, or Che Guevara, the Che Guevara version of Fonzie. There's a bigger world out there, and once you have the opportunity to let go of some of those trappings, some really cool things could result. I don't want to, there are people who I've heard say that, attribute to my band a much more prominent role in, blazing a trail for this stuff. And I would not say that's the case. I would just say we were doing the unusual thing that happened to involve, the material like we're talking about, and we just did it, and gradually more people started doing that. I don't think I want to claim credit for it, but it was it was the case that there was a band doing that in 1985 when I didn't know any others Australia had some pretty good bands at that time, but then after a time there were more, and there were places to play for little quirky bands like that when there had previously not been. And so, we were, I would say, I wouldn't say like trailblazer or like pioneer. I was more like canary in a coal mine, and we just narrowly avoided being snuffed out.
With all of that now, how is your process of writing songs this like, now compared to
Yeah.
30 years?
Yeah. It's, there's some ways where it's completely the same. And in fact, maybe even a little more like the early times as far as the mechanical part. I don't tend to do big elaborate demos these days. I just it's mostly, I focus on the composition, but it's mostly like the ones that work. It's a strong conceit that I try to gradually develop into. And the ideal is where you don't have even, you have very few, and hopefully as the ultimate ideal that you never really get, is that every single element works and to enforce the plan and the conceit and what's getting and the movement of the song. And that means you've got 2.5, 3 minutes to do this. So all of these things have to do several things at once. And that's the sort of thing where if you start thinking about how much has to go on to make a thing like that work, you could get paralyzed with you can get overwhelmed, and that has happened to me before. But the thing that grounds it in reality is the process where you are developing all these things gradually, and it takes, you have to strum through it as it's developing thousands of times, years and years of strumming before it takes shape. And if you try to do it as a shortcut, it is almost never as good. If you try to like the plan is almost, you have the notion of it, but it's sort of out there in the ether, and you have to gradually pull it in. And if you try to do it deliberately, you often don't do it very well. And that's the big difference also, is that I never release something that isn't actually finished. So, which is the case, a lot of times you're on a strict schedule when you're a little unsuccessful band, and the time comes to record the record, you record it whether or not your songs are done, and just hope for the best. So I don't do that now, and the songs are better now because of that, if nothing else.
That What to you right now feels like when it's finished, when you can just be like, this is good?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's like Leaves of Grass. He rewrote that up till his dying day. And that there's an element of that where it can always get better. You get to the point where you're deciding on the level of, do I use the word of or at in this context or whatever? And you refine, and but basically, when I think, if all of the elements are actually doing their job, and enough so that they don't have to be fixed, there's no problem that has to be fixed, that's when it feels finished. And many songs that are quite good never get there. So I'm not saying that always has to be the case, but that's the thing the sort of that's the pattern that you're on some level striving for. And but then the other thing you have to learn is there's sometimes when you got to let it breathe and leave it alone in certain aspects. And that's the thing that's always been hardest for me. That's the thing I have to put effort into, because I'm just I have a hyper concerned attitude towards these things. And, you can overdo it. You can, and I've overwritten songs that are not bad by virtue of being overwritten, but could have been better if I had figured out the right time to back off. And that's a mark of maybe maturity that I'm still sort of struggling with. And it's funny because I'm talking about my current stable of songs, which, most people have not heard. It's quite possible that they will never be heard, depending on
Really? Never?
Well, I don't. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? But for this stuff I have now to be recorded properly and released properly, that's a tall order in this day and age where nobody buys music and nobody cares when you put out music. And when you do it, it's like it exists to all intents and purposes for 18-hour period, and then it gets subsumed in the vast sea of content. So I don't know. I do hope to record more things, but I want to do it properly, and I don't know it. Like I said, that's a tall order in this day and age. There's a difference between releasing a record and just pressing upload, and that's why I'm rather conservative on this. But what I'm saying is I'm talking like I'm referring to these what I consider to be quite successful compositions with nothing to back it up, because I play them live sometimes when I do shows, although I don't do shows now. So people have heard some of these, but I like I said, I'm writing a check my ass can't cash in at least as far as I can't present evidence to the jury. However, I still believe that what I've said is true, that my songs I'm writing now are better.
I hope that we get to hear these soon, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts all about your process. This has been so awesome for me. So Frank Portman, Dr. Frank, I still have the Junior Mints box that you signed at a concert in 2001. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and talking about songwriting and guitar.
Yeah, that was a good interview. Those were questions that I don't often get asked.
That was amazing. I wish I could go back in time to my young self watching the Mr. T Experience play and be like, hey, just so you know, in the future, there's going to be a thing called podcasting, and you're going to do one, and then you're going to talk to Frank, and you guys are going to just geek out about songwriting and the process, and you're going to learn about all these other things about the band that you didn't know and his insights to guitar. So that was amazing. And hopefully, Frank, we have him back, because there's so much more I want to talk to him about. If you feel like you've been hitting a wall with your guitar playing, it's just the same thing over and over. Same chords, same strumming patterns, and you're looking for like the reset button, just head on over to songwritingforguitar.com and sign up for the Songwriting for Guitar Insiders group. Every month, I give you a new skill-building module. We meet together monthly as a group on Zoom, and I help you get unstuck. What songs are you working on? The process. All of that we talk about and more. So just head on over to songwritingforguitar.com and join the Songwriting for Guitar Insiders group. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please head on over to iTunes and give us a stellar review. This episode was edited and produced by the amazing Chris Fafalius. I'm Mike Myers. Until next time.